All right, here is my second attempt at these videos. I hope you all saw the email earlier that I recorded them, uploaded them, but my mute button had been turned on without me realizing it, so I am starting over. Welcome to Professor Hoffman's guest bathroom, because this is the only place that I can get some privacy in my house when 6 kids are running around. So, this lecture is going to continue to set the stage for the research process, talk a little bit about the role of a social work researcher, kind of some of the values that they possess, ways to look at research material in a critical thinking way, kind of giving you a tool called the Internet Cafe. Cafe is an acronym from stuff. So we're going to go through that to continue to set the stage to set you up for success for your own research study. So our learning objectives today are describing the common characteristics of social work researchers, explaining the components of the Internet Cafe and the critical thinking standards, listing the 3 roles and 4 phases of research, and verbalizing the 5 steps of evidence-based practice, which will be the second video because I'm not going to put it all into one. All right, so this is all content from Chapter 3. Like I said earlier, we skipped over Chapter 2 because 1 and 3 I felt flowed a little bit better together, and they kind of defined the research process best. And so then we'll circle back to Chapter 2 on Monday, and that's going to talk about how to set up research questions. So Chapter 3 is going towards evidence-based practice. So it is not a common thing when you ask social work students what their end goal for their social profession is for them to say that they are aiming to be social work researchers. It's not something that you often hear. It is definitely present. There are some people who are very passionate about research, which is awesome. I've grown to love it. If you would have asked me back at the beginning of my social work career if I'd ever see myself engaging in research, I'd be like, absolutely not. I suck at details. I suck at math. Research would probably not be something that's in my wheelhouse. But the more that I've experienced it and engaged in it, it is a lot different than what I anticipated it to be. And there is a beauty in doing the research because it really validates the work that we do. It shows the end goal that we're not just talking for the sake of talking, but we're actually implementing things that are purposeful. We're creating programs that are purposeful. We're connecting people to resources that are purposeful. So there's such a beauty of it. And I want to encourage you all not to sell your perception of research short and to really be aware that this is something that's going to be present in your social work career, whether you like it or not. So 5 values that also social work researchers have in common. And we could honestly just drop the researchers tag behind it. It's really what social workers have when they're doing research. 1, they're aware of their own values. So this is a big one that we really need to be mindful of when we're engaging in research, is that we all come with our own biases and preconceived notions, and we have our own specific value set that drives how we see the world. And so I think an example that I'll often use for myself is I've been open that I am part of a blended family, so I have stepchildren. My stepkids have 2 separate households. And so I often look through the lens of how different things impact blended families and what kind of impact that has on the children. And so, like school, does the school have the opportunity to list separate households? Does the teacher know that they need to send 2 packets home, 2 report cards home with the student? Do they have, let's say it's Father's Day, and they make a gift for their card, or a card or something for their dad? Do they also take into consideration that they might have a stepdad who also plays a really important role in their life? And so I have to be aware that my bias is looking through that lens, and so I can be quick to judge a situation if they don't accommodate for blended families, or they're not mindful or not aware. Often it's very unintentional. But I have to check myself that I don't make a quick judgment on a doctor's office or a school if they aren't looking through the same lens that I am looking through. And so that could impact, if I'm doing some sort of research, excuse me, and I find that it's very biased towards what the traditional nuclear family has always looked like, I might write it off, or I might get angry, or I might discredit it and not see the value that the service or the whatever has. And so we need to make sure as ethical researchers that we are aware and being willing to admit that we're looking through a bias, and then working to kind of address those and look at it through a neutral lens. Another characteristic is that we're skeptics. And so not that we don't ever trust anything, but we're always looking to challenge and make sure that we're not just accepting things at face value. And so that skeptical attitude can kind of get a bad rap. But in this instance, it's really looking at, are we continuing to challenge ourselves and not always saying, okay, I did this research, this is what I've got, this is the end all be all. We're constantly reevaluating and looking at what could be done better, what's valid and what's not valid. Another thing is sharing findings with others. And so really beautiful thing about research is it often can save a lot of time for somebody else because you've done the work to find that there's valid services, interventions. And so if you're sharing your findings with others, it is allowing them to not have to do the same work. It's giving them great tools to put in their toolbox, and in return you can receive the same information, maybe on a different topic. And so it's part of, it's built, the CSWE and the NSAW Code of Ethics both talk about the need for research. So it's part of the mandate of what social workers are expected to do. And so it kind of then naturally, if we're looking at characteristics of researchers, it's that we're also sharing our findings with others. The next one is being honest. And sometimes I have to laugh at this one because I was like, well, aren't we always honest? And maybe that's because I'm looking at it through the value and maybe my faith-based worldview, that people are naturally honest and have integrity. But we do hold a lot of power when we are conducting research, because we might produce findings that maybe don't match our end goal. So maybe the intervention that we worked so hard to create, the group model was perfect. It's our baby. We've poured so much energy into it, but it didn't actually help the clients, let's say, reduce their cigarette use. And we are crushed, excuse me, because we've poured so much of ourselves into it. There might be the temptation to be misleading with the information or skew the findings to still make us feel valid in what we did and not really give the outcomes that actually are accurate. And so that's a piece of integrity. And honestly, I kind of marry those two terms together because we have the power to skew things if we want to or not. So I think an example that I personally had, one of my jobs when I was working with a homeless prevention program, we had a grant fund and we were allowed, every family who came into our program were allowed like X amount of months of service where we would pay their rent and they had to do X, Y, and Z. And the goal was at the end of the 6 months, they'd be stable enough to take over their rent on their own. But we often found that clients at the end of 6 months still needed additional months. And so we would grant them additional months with supervisor's approval. It was something that was never gone. We would never go rogue and just decide on our own. We went through the proper channels of the agency. But when it came time to write the report on the outcomes for the year, excuse me, our director and CEO, who hadn't known all of the information and kind of that some of the participants were going over their allotted time, just was not pleased with the findings. And I was very anxious writing them because I was like, gosh, this looks horrible. We didn't meet our program objectives. Am I going to get fired? And so, I have a gut, you have kind of that gut reaction to be like, well, can I kind of fudge this over? Or I kind of minimize it? Or can I do something with the research outcomes to not get myself in trouble? And obviously I didn't, because one of my values is integrity, and I can't lie. It stresses me out too much. But it was not pretty. I did not get fired, but it was not pretty. And I got told a lot of things about my work ethic, which I had to take with a grain of salt, because I knew that although we had extended over the grant's allowable time, it wasn't decisions that I made independently, and I was just the easiest person to put full blame on. I'll take responsibility. I could have done my service implementation better. Obviously, you can tell even after 10 plus years, I still feel this angst about it. But I think that's an example where we can definitely change things to our advantage, but we can't because it's not ethical. circle. And then number 5, I'm so sorry. We need to have good research attitudes. And so even though if research isn't our cup of tea or something that we might gravitate towards, it is essential to all of our functionings within social work. And it really has a lot of validity to it. It really not justifies, but it shows what we do is actually really productive and helps clients. And it, again, like I've said before, it's in the Code of Ethics and CSWE's competencies. And so it is part of the essential function of a social worker. All right, so we need to talk about using what's called the Internet Cafe. And so this is a tool that we can use as we develop our research skills to think critically about information that we have encountered. And so the internet can be someone's best friend because you can quickly do research on a topic and find answers, but it is essentially our worst enemy because anybody can be a expert on anything, and you have to be able to filter through some of the things that you are reading. And so when you encounter some sort of article, scholarly research information, we are going to challenge you to use the Internet Cafe mentality. So CAFE is an acronym for first, you're going to challenge the information and accountability. So we did this a little bit last week where we talked about like how we receive information and those different things. Hey, don't come in. All right, but you can't talk, babe. So we want to make sure that whatever information we're encountering, we're looking at who said it, what's the source, how do we know it's credible, is it peer reviewed, how do I know that this person is valid in what they're saying. So we want to challenge, kind of goes back to that skepticism where we're not just accepting things. And then we want to adapt. And so this one's really interesting because sometimes we might get information, let's say if we're doing research and we find that if you don't take X amount of pills this day, you are ultimately going to die. Well, if there's safety issues around the information that we received, we need to challenge it a little bit harder than, let's say we're reading an article and it says that Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck just got a divorce. We might challenge that with less skepticism and urgency because that doesn't necessarily have life or death safety concerns attached to it. It might be very interesting. It might feel like life or death, but we might not challenge it not as thoroughly or harshly as we would with something that we need to make sure that our safety is being cared for. F is for file. So this one I think is kind of really good to use because instead of just taking something and accepting it or like immediately like, yes, this is true, or like, nope, I hate this is stupid, we just file it in our brains and we kind of marinate over it. So if you ever talk about cooking, you like marinate your chicken in some sort of sauce to kind of bring it flavor, and you might bring you something new to think about, or you might come back to it and be like, I totally get it now. And so you kind of want to just file away and let it marinate in your mind for a little bit. And the final one is evaluate and reevaluate, and evaluate and reevaluate regularly. So nothing is ever final in research, unfortunately. Things always change, the world changes, people change. And so we have to make sure that we're re-looking at things and not just accepting it. So if we talk about like valid sources, we always say like, hey, they have to be within 5 to 10 years because lots of things can change over the time. So that is the Internet Cafe: challenge, adapt, file, and evaluate. And then finally, there are 3 research roles that a social worker can take. You can be the consumer, the creator, or a partner. So the consumer is somebody who is receiving the research. So this is like when you do a Google search, or you do a search on the library, or you go to a training about evidence-based practice. Like you are receiving the information that was done by an independent researcher. And there's the creator, where you're coming up with the research study, you're finding the knowledge, and you're disseminating and giving it back to somebody else. There's also the partner, where you're actively engaging with somebody else to create the research. So whether you're a co-creator on a research project, or you might be a research participant yourself. And so with all of these roles, you're going to see those values we talked about at the beginning needing to be present. Like you have to have honesty through all of this. You have to be a skeptic through all of it. You have to check your bias because it can really influence how these roles look if you don't have those values.